Now here's something which is very interesting when we come to verse 27. This is the last boy now. And you know how the last son in a family, or the last child in a family, is always petted and pampered and spoiled. And particularly when Jacob had one out of his 4 wives was his favorite, and his favorite wife, Rachel, had only 2 sons, Joseph and Benjamin. And one of those 2 sons disappeared, he thought dead. Benjamin must have been the darling of Jacob's heart in every way. He must have looked a little bit like his mother Rachel, and everything would have made Jacob really pamper and spoil Benjamin. And one would think that, humanly speaking, when he came to prophesy over Benjamin, he'd say, oh, God will really give you the best. But see what he says. There we see how Jacob does not prophesy according to the natural mind. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. There we see a spiritual man who's been cleansed from partiality towards a particular child. It's a tremendous lesson for fathers to learn. If we can learn to prophesy like this, to be cleansed from this partiality. Yeah, Benjamin is my favorite child, but God says he's a ravenous wolf. In the morning he devours the prey, and in the evening he divides the spoil. Cunning as a wolf. From the tribe of Benjamin came King Saul. And we read in the history of Israel that the tribe of Benjamin was a fierce tribe. Exactly like this, a ravenous wolf. But it's very interesting that to see there that Jacob does not go by his natural preferences. I must confess that in my life I've seen probably very few fathers who attain to this freedom from partiality, even among those who understand the new and living way. Very few take it seriously to cleanse themselves from partiality towards their children. It's a very difficult thing to cleanse ourselves from, but he who is wholehearted to partake of the divine nature will see that God is impartial and will really seek to be impartial himself. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is what the Father told him, what said to them when he blessed them, and this is the verse I was telling you earlier. He blessed them, everyone, with the blessing appropriate to him. Prophetically, he gave each one exactly what was needed for him, without partiality, without preference. I've seen people prophesying in charismatic meetings. It's all so shallow. It depends on, this pastor goes and prophesies over somebody, and if he likes him, he'll say something good. If he doesn't like him, he'll say something bad. That's not prophecy. That's just a deception. That's like Isaac saying, bring me the venison, and I'll give a good prophecy over you. There are pastors like that. You bring them the venison, they'll give a good prophecy over you. But Jacob's not going to be fooled by venison or any such thing. You may be my favorite son, Benjamin, but I've got to tell you exactly what God's shown me. Oh, I long to be a father like that. I want to be a brother like that who is being disciplined so that there's no partiality at all towards any human being, towards any brother in the church, to speak exactly what is right without any human attachment. To see as God sees. That's what we should long for. If we let God discipline us, we can be like that. That what we speak will be appropriate to each person without partiality. Long for it, dear brothers and sisters. That's our calling. Long for it. Think that a crook like Jacob could become like this in the end of his days. God could work on him. There's hope for every one of us if we are wholehearted. This partiality is really a wretched thing, that if we don't take it seriously, it'll remain with us till our dying day. We got to root it out and cleanse it out. Partiality towards one another in the church. You got to cleanse it out. Then he charged them. His eyes are on Canaan. He says, don't bury me in this advanced country, Egypt. Take me back to the primitive country of Canaan. Bury me with my fathers in the cave of Ephron the Hittite. None of all these fancy pyramid tombs for me. That old cave down in primitive Canaan is good enough for me. That's why God's called me. There they buried Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and his wife Rebekah. There I buried Leah. And when he finished charging his sons, he's prophesied right up to last breath. Verse 33, he drew his feet into the bed, breathed the last, was gathered to his people. What a wonderful way to end one's life. What a wonderful way to end one's life. I hope it challenges us and encourages us that God could make so much out of a man who started life as a crook and a cheat and a deceiver and a grabber. That he submitted to God's disciplines. I believe it's one of the greatest examples in the Old Testament of what God can do in a man who's just like us. If we submit to God's disciplines, He can make that crook into a prophet. That's what we see in Jacob's life. Anyone, guys, no partiality with God. What He did for Jacob, He'll do for us. But we have to give the right answer when He says, "What's your name, Lord, deceiver?" Jacob. We got to give the right answer when He asks us, "What's your name?" Yeah, Lord, this is the truth, this is what I am. That's the man whom God changes. And Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. And Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father, chapter 50, verse 2, and the physicians embalmed Israel. Now 40 days were required for this. Such is the period required for embalming, and the Egyptians wept for him 70 days. And when the days of mourning were past, Joseph spoke to the household of Pharaoh. Remember this. Now we've got to understand this picture clearly. We can say, comparing it to today's world, we can say Joseph was like, say, the man next to the President of the United States of America or something like that. Who would say, maybe he went out from some primitive country like India and became the top man in America, and he took his father over, and his father says, "No, my home's back in the old land where I came from." And this man, who's the top ruler in another country, goes up to Pharaoh and says, "I've got to go back to Canaan. My home is there." You see, Joseph is not ashamed to stand up to the world's greatest monarch and tell him, "My home's in Canaan. I've got to take my dad's body over there to bury him there, not in any of the fancy tombs of Egypt." Think of that. Think to say, though I'm here in Egypt and I'm a ruler, I refuse to identify with this country. I want to be identified with the country in which God has called me. There's something we see. He was not afraid. He was not afraid of what Pharaoh would think. Look at this fellow. After all that I've done for him all these 30, 40 years, now he still wants to go back to Canaan. He was not afraid. He says, "Now let me go up and bury my father in Canaan." I'm sure Pharaoh would have been glad to make a fantastic, at least a small pyramid for Jacob. But no, they wanted to go back to Canaan. Pharaoh said, "Go up and bury your father." And Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his house, and all the elders of the land of Egypt. All the household of Joseph and his brothers and his father's household, they left only their little ones. And they went up with him, chariots and horsemen, to the great company. And they made a lamentation at the threshing floor of Atad, verse 10. And when the inhabitants of land, the Canaanites, saw the mourning, they said, "This is a grievous mourning for the Egyptians." And thus his sons did for him as he had charged them. For his sons carried him to the land of Canaan, buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah before Mamre. And after he had buried his father, verse 14, Joseph returned to Egypt, he and his brothers, all who had gone up with him to bury his father.